Queer people exist. This is a fact that humanity has been aware of since the start, but if this concept is relatively new to you, that may be because you've spent your entire life watching nothing but cartoons. Specifically, all ages cartoons produced in the English-speaking West. While queer people have been working behind the scenes in the cartoon industry since it began, it's only recently that, in big-budget, widely released productions especially, we've started seeing characters in those cartoons explicitly represented as queer. This started small. In 2013, there was a single shot in Disney's Frozen where you could see Oaken's husband and children in the background.
Hi, family!
In 2014, Korra and Asami hold hands and walk off into the proverbial sunset at the end of Legend of Korra. These were considered kind of a big deal at the time. But representation has rapidly accelerated since then, to the point where one of 2020's most critically acclaimed animated series was show ran by a non-binary lesbian, features a lesbian in the starring role, and has her lesbian relationship be the emotional center of the series. A lesbian love story, if you will. That's a big difference in 7 years. And as queer creators are given more resources and freedom to tell the stories that they want to tell, they're inevitably going to start pushing for their shows to start representing more specific aspects of the queer experience. After all, being queer isn't simply about having a different sexuality or gender identity from straight people. Queer people have their own entire cultures with hundreds of years of history. And, unfortunately, all queer people also experience homophobia. As terrible as homophobia is, it's also very important to talk about it. So, how do we include the experience of homophobia in our cartoons, while telling those stories in a way that works for children's animation? Minor spoilers ahead for the shows listed on screen, and major spoilers for the end of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. Also, homophobia is a heavy issue, and thus a few of these shows get into heavier topics. Content warnings will appear at the beginning of relevant sections. Perhaps unsurprisingly, one of the most common ways cartoons depict homophobia is to simply not depict it at all. In The Dragon Prince, a lot of the characters we meet are visibly queer.
My heart goes out with this one. Don't worry. I promise I will return your heart to you.
But this queerness doesn't seem to affect their lives at all. Nobody treats anyone else any different based on their orientation. Even the baddest of bad guys just don't care. In Kipo and the Age of the Wonder Beasts, our eponymous protagonist develops a crush on her friend Benson when he takes her out for a night at Ratland, an amusement park run by rats. When Kipo admits her feelings to Benson,
I don't know if it's that I'm turning 13, but I feel different right now. And I just feel like I need to tell you that... I think I like you.
Oh.
You don't feel the same.
Oh, no, I like you too. Really, really like you. You're all kinds of awesome, but you should know something.
You like me as a friend.
Yes, because I'm gay.
this revelation doesn't really have any long-term repercussions, though. The two characters grow closer despite the small misunderstanding, and everyone is perfectly accepting of Benson and the queer relationship that he develops through later seasons. These are worlds of perfect equality. They're far from being worlds devoid of conflict, but homophobia, or even the idea that straight people and queer people might be different, simply doesn't exist. And this approach is fine. Not every show needs to tackle every issue, and sometimes it's nice to see a world where queer characters don't have to struggle simply because they're queer. But from a big picture perspective, this approach is a bit of a non-starter. Like I said earlier, in real life, queer people and straight people do have differences in their lives. Not just in terms of bad things that happen, like homophobia, but also good things, like queer-specific communities. If we never let those differences into our fantasy worlds, then we never get to talk about them. And someone should talk about them eventually because they're important to the lives of people watching. It's not like these shows lack any progressive representation. Benson saying the word gay is, unfortunately, kind of a big deal, and Dragon Prince has a whole episode about 2 lesbian queens and their daughter, queer women in power being not a thing you see a lot of in popular fantasy. So there's nothing wrong with the perfect equality approach, but we're not going to get very far if it's all we have. So, what if we try and do the opposite? Instead of talking about cartoons for a second, let's talk about comics. Based on cartoons. Specifically, the Legend of Korra follow-up comics, Turf Wars, and Ruins of the Empire. These are some of the only cartoons that have tried to represent literal homophobia, and the result is mixed. Turf Wars, the first comic series, immediately follows the final shot of the TV show, with Korra and Asami going on a romantic spirit world vacation. When an incident ends their sabbatical early, the pair decide to visit Korra's parents for dinner before going home. When the couple announces their relationship, Korra's parents are more than happy for them. However, they advise the couple to consider keeping their relationship private, as not everyone might be so accepting. Korra is upset at the suggestion that they should hide themselves, but still, once the two get back to Republic City, they're unwilling to let anyone else know about their relationship. That is, until Kaya approaches them in private to tell them about her own experience being queer, and talk about how homophobia has historically manifested itself in different places across the world. Then the conflict is basically dropped forever and is almost never acknowledged again. These comics show us some upsides of a literal representation of homophobia, but also a lot of its potential pitfalls. Korra and Asami trying to navigate the publicity of their relationship is arguably the main plot of the first issue of Turf Wars, but once the gang uprising takes center stage in the story, the plot is basically dropped until it's wrapped up in a few lines of dialogue at the end of the final volume. In the second series, Ruins of the Empire, there's such a lack of acknowledgement of homophobia that it feels like we're in another perfect equality setting, despite the comics telling us that we're not. This is weird in a bunch of ways. It's a whole lot of setup for almost no payoff, for one. But it also just feels off. The reader knows what real homophobia looks like, and if you tell them that homophobia in this fictional world works the same, but don't actually show it, that creates a disconnect in your narrative. In some ways, these problems aren't the comic's fault. Years of censorship mean that we've never been able to talk about queerness in the Avatar series before, and so it's always going to feel like a bit of a retcon just talking about it now. But in attempting to show realistic homophobia despite that, the Korra comics remind us of a difficult truth, that real homophobia is complicated and messy, and portraying it accurately is no easy task. That being said, I still commend these comics for trying, and we do get some great moments out of it. In particular, the scene with Kaya being an older queer mentor to the main couple feels particularly revolutionary. I'd love to see a show in the future crack this difficult approach to representation, but until then, what other techniques do we have to tackle this topic? Instead of trying to talk about homophobia literally, Steven Universe approaches the topic using allegory. In the show, Fusion, where two characters fuse together into a new person, is used to represent queer love and relationships.
Steven! Thank you! Garnet! You're a fusion?
Likewise, Steven Universe also has an allegory for homophobia. The tyrannical homeworld government heavily discriminates against fusion, to the point where it can be punishable by death, and almost every character we meet from Homeworld is, to put it lightly, against it.
Oh, great. You're both out? And you're fused again? Why? Fusion is just a cheap tactic to make weak gems stronger. Quit embarrassing yourselves. I've seen what you really are.
Where Steven Universe succeeds in its representation is by showing how this systemic discrimination impacts those who are the victim of it, and how that impact varies from character to character. Pearl, who grew up immersed in Homeworld's culture, never had a model for what a healthy mutual relationship looks like. This results in her not only being unable to let go of her past emotionally dependent relationship with Rose,
My Pearl, you're wonderful.
but also makes it difficult for her to form healthy relationships with others moving forward, often resulting in both parties being hurt by her actions.
Wait, let me explain.
You've been fixing the hub.
It really was Peridot. The first time?
You tricked me.
No, we just needed a reason to fuse. I just wanted to share a few more victories with you.
Garnet, while being much more comfortable with herself, suffers from a sort of pseudo-PTSD. Certain situations, almost always somehow linked to her history of oppression, will cause her to spiral, and either shut down or literally fall apart.
I don't feel like forgiving Pearl. Don't understand, you must. If you're not going to listen, then you can just go!
We must move past this, Ruby.
She lied to us so we would form sardonyx. She tricked us. Don't you feel used?
The two halves of the couple always come back together, but these situations show us that Garnet's confident exterior isn't as authentic as it might appear to be. Importantly, we don't learn all of this at once, or even in a linear fashion. Steven, our protagonist and point-of-view character, is blissfully unaware of all of this at the beginning of the series. Bits and pieces of these stories are only revealed to us when characters have a moment of either weakness or intentional vulnerability. We only really get the full picture of how systemic discrimination has impacted these characters' lives by the time we're in the final stretch of episodes of the whole show. Because Steven Universe uses allegory to talk about homophobia, it can set the scope and scale of its representation more specifically. Because we know that fusion phobia does not reflect real homophobia one-to-one, even if we know that one represents the other, there's less friction when the show breaks from our expectations of real-world discrimination, and scenes that might be quite shocking if they were more realistic are easier to watch.
How dare you fuse with a member of my court?
Forgive me,
You will be broken for this!
The fantasy setting is also used for some very evocative imagery. For example, Lapis and Jasper are both gems from Homeworld, and both share its values that fusion is something unnatural and dangerous. When they fuse, the result reflects this perspective. So, Steven Universe proves to us that allegory is an effective approach to the topic of homophobia. But Steven Universe is a big show. It has hundreds of episodes to build up these complex themes of systemic oppression and its fallout. But what if the story we want to tell is smaller? Unlike Steven Universe's systemic scope, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power focuses its examination of homophobia on a single character's storyline, Katra's. She-Ra is also more subtle with its allegory, with the details that clue us into the fact that Catra is dealing with internalized homophobia being a little more opaque. At the beginning of the show, Catra and Adora are in love, even if they don't understand that. Part of the reason they might not is that they grew up in the toxic culture of the Horde, and were raised by their manipulative adoptive parent Shadow Weaver. Shadow Weaver both disapproves of and exploits their relationship, trying to push them apart while using them as tools to control each other's emotions.
I've kept you around this long because Adora was fond of you, but if you ever do anything to jeopardize her future, I will dispose of you myself. Do you understand?
Please stop! She didn't mean to.
Adora, you must do a better job of keeping her under control.
Among the inciting incidents of the show, Adora leaves the Horde, in part to try and better herself and unlearn the Horde's toxic mentality. And even though Catra knows that the Horde is a hostile environment for her...
Duh! Did you just figure that out? Manipulation is Shadow Weaver's whole thing. She's been messing with our heads since we were kids. How could you possibly be okay with that? Because it doesn't matter what they do. The two of us look out for each other.
She stays anyway. When she returns home, we learn that Adora wasn't just a source of companionship for Catra, she was also a source of safety.
Easy, Catra. Adora's not here to protect you anymore.
So Catra does what she has to do in order to stay safe. She doubles down on her devotion to the Horde, both externally and internally.
Rise, Force Captain Catra.
Unfortunately for Catra, she still loves Adora, a fact that is somewhat incompatible with her new commitment to the Horde. This causes her to go into a spiral of self-hatred. She becomes obsessed with ruining Adora's life while publicly asserting that she doesn't care about her.
And where is she now, huh? Off being She-Ra? Get used to it. You think she's not going to leave you behind too, Sparkles?
And she aggressively pushes away any intimacy or companionship offered by other women around her.
You're my friend. You're everything to me.
Caring about people is what got me into this mess. Get out of here, or they'll take you down with me. What? Are you stupid? I said leave!
When none of this works to make her feel better about herself, she starts to care less and less about her own life.
Threats only work on someone who has something to lose. But me? I've already lost it all.
Which eventually escalates into almost explicit self-harm.
Catra, look what's happening! You're going to destroy everything!
I don't care. I won't let you win. I'd rather see the whole world end than let that happen.
The end result of this is a scene in which Catra is literally brainwashed by the Horde. And in this state, she tells Adora that she's the source of all her pain.
Snap out of it, Catra! I don't want to hurt you!
But you have already hurt me. Prime has set me free of that pain. The pain that you caused. He will set us all free. Forever.
Yikes. Even after, when she begins to unlearn her toxicity and reconnect with Adora, Shadow Weaver is still there, telling her that her love for Adora is a bad and harmful thing.
You were just gonna leave?
I'm doing you a favor. I'm a distraction, right? Now you can go save the world without having to worry about me confusing you.
No, that's not true! Don't listen to Shadow Weaver. This isn't about her.
It's only when she finally lets go of Shadow Weaver, literally and figuratively, that she can finally admit to Adora and herself how she's felt all along.
Don't you get it? I love you! I always have! So please, just this once,
In a sense, Catra's story is a coming out story, but while a lot of coming out stories focus on the messy aftermath, She-Ra looks at the difficult path getting there, at the self-hatred and all the harm that it causes, both to Catra herself and those around her. And although it loses a bit of readability in never being explicit about its themes of internalized homophobia, that doesn't actually hurt it much as a story that reflects a real-life experience. After all, in real life, not all young women experiencing internalized homophobia are explicitly thinking, "I hate myself because I'm gay." This is especially true if, like Catra, you grow up in an environment where those sorts of topics aren't really talked about. Accurately then, Catra seems to have almost no idea why she feels the way she does for most of the series, experiencing only brief moments of clarity. It's not until the very end that she starts putting all the pieces together. So, now that we've looked at some shows and how they tackle homophobia in a variety of ways, what kind of conclusions can we come to? I think one thing that's important to keep in mind in this discussion is how new queer representation in cartoons is, and how fast we've gotten here. We've gone from wink-wink implications to explicitly lesbian protagonist in 7 years or so, blazingly fast for an industry that historically has moved pretty slow and been fairly conservative. So it's a bit of a bold call to be making any strong conclusions about the right way to do representation of a topic that's been barely explored at all in the medium of all ages animation. The Legend of Korra comics may have faltered in their attempt to realistically portray homophobia, and Steven Universe and She-Ra make a compelling argument for the use of allegory. But I don't think that realism bad, allegory good is the right conclusion to draw from this. Rather, the thing that sticks out to me is that the best stories about queer people dealing with discrimination are those with intent. If you want your stories to contain not just queer characters, but uniquely queer experiences, you should be willing to commit to making those experiences a fundamental part of your show and its universe. It's also important to remember that we still have so much ground to cover beyond this topic. While researching for this video, I found almost no examples of shows portraying the uniquely positive parts of queer life. The community, the art, the mentorship and sense of belonging. We're even still struggling with saying basic words or using basic symbols to identify our characters as who they are. Representing queer experiences still seems to be more about the pain than the parties. And again, homophobia is a necessary thing to talk about, but we can talk about it better, we can talk about it more, and hopefully soon we'll be able to talk about other aspects of queerness too. Thanks for watching. Hi everyone, Rose here. Thanks so much for watching my first video. There's more coming, so remember to subscribe and hit the bell so that you can follow along. And if you want to support me more, leave a like and a comment, and share the video with your friends and communities. I'll see you next month for the next video, and until then, bye-bye.